tarde a todos e todas. Para mim é uma honra, então, abrir essa mais uma sessão das conferências do IEAT, particularmente essa conferência que se coloca, então, dentro da programação, das atividades da Cátedra Darcy Ribeiro, Soberania, Educação e Política, que foi inaugurada, então, o ano passado. Eu gostaria de agradecer a presença de vocês e as pessoas que tornaram possível a esse evento, em especial Ana, que é a nossa pós-doc da Cátedra, e através dela a rede de estudos sobre democracia e desinformação, rede que é um grupo de pesquisa também vinculado ao IEAT, e também agradecer ao grupo de pesquisa em democracia e justiça, MATE, que também tem a coordenação do professor Ricardo Fabrini. E gostaria de agradecer essa parceria com o Ricardo, que também faz parte da comissão gestora da Cátedra Darcy Ribeiro. E essa é uma iniciativa, não sei se vocês sabem, do IEAT, de criação dessas cátedras de longa duração, numa temática específica, de tal maneira que a gente possa, em torno de um tema, como é um tema transdisciplinar, articular uma pesquisa avançada em que envolva a vinda, então, de pesquisadores para interagir com os grupos da UFMG. Em especial, também, essa cátedra pretende promover esse que eu estou chamando de ecossistema de pesquisa transdisciplinar, de tal maneira que, agregado à cátedra, nós temos pesquisadores da própria instituição, temos bolsistas de iniciação científica, bolsistas de pós-doc. Então, é uma nova iniciativa do IEAT no sentido de promover a pesquisa transdisciplinar de ponta na UFMG. Então, I'd like to welcome Professor Tiziano Bonini of the University of Siena. It's our pleasure to welcome you here at UFMG. Eu vou passar a palavra para o professor Ricardo, para que ele possa fazer, então, a apresentação do professor Tiziano Bonini. Muito obrigada.
Então, também vou já começar em inglês. I'll switch to English. Thanking everyone. It's very good to see this auditorium full of people from different departments. And special thanks to Ana Colli, that has been very important in the organization of this. I also wanted to express my gratitude to Pró-Reitoria de Pós-Graduação and FAFICH that have funded Professor Tiziano Bonini's visit to UFMG. And my special thanks, obviously, to Professor Tiziano Bonini that has come from Italy, specifically for a 2-week visit at UFMG. So Professor Tiziano Bonini is an associate professor in sociology of culture and communication in the Department of Social, Political and Cognitive Science at the University of Siena in Italy. He's the author of Algoritmos of Resistance, the Everyday Fight Against Platform Power, with Emiliano Tereré, that was published in 2023 by MIT Press, and I highly recommend the book. So he'll be speaking about the book in the conference today. And he's an expert in political communication, culture studies, radio studies, with several articles published on topics that include podcasts, public media, audience studies, platforms and their affordances, and algorithmic solidarity. So he has had contributions in sociology, political science, communication studies, philosophy, and I think that he has been discussing relevant topics that interest a wide array of scholarships in different departments. So thank you so much for being here, and so the floor is yours, and I'll sit there so that you can see the slides and presentation. Thank you.
Thanks for inviting me. Estoy obrigado por la invitación. Yo falo español, pero no falo portugués. Pero agradezco mucho la invitación y la hospitalidad. Thank you. Could you hear me? Yeah. Maybe. I will do that. What these algorithms of resistance are? The book has this title that is a kind of reply, also, at least in our mind, to the more famous book of Sophia Noble, Algorithms of Oppression. But it's not, I would say that it's just only partly about resistance, but it's mostly about agency. So it's mostly a book about human agency in the face of platform power. So today, a growing number of social interactions, economic transactions, political engagements, and affective relations are enabled and regulated by an expanding global network of digital platforms operated through algorithms. As algorithmic infrastructures become enmeshed in the fabric of society, more and more aspects of everyday life are being captured and released in data streams that feed digital entities unilaterally coded and controlled by profit-driven tech companies. In this lecture, I will share my ongoing research on algorithmic agency, and I will delve into the findings of an extensive online and offline fieldwork conducted across the global north and the global south together with my research mates between 2020 and 2022 that gave birth to a series of articles, and especially to this book that I co-authored with my research mate and friend Emiliano Trede. And finally, I will reflect on how grassroots practices can spark emancipatory frictions that reinvent and disrupt maybe the uneven power relation between users and platforms. So what this book tries to do, this book came out, the idea of this book came out in a moment in the past decade, between 2018 and 2019, where Emiliano and I were a little bit not totally satisfied with some kind of monolithic accounts of platform power that were coming out at the time. For example, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Zizek Zuboff, that was great analysis of platform power, but we were feeling that there was something more in it. We tried to contrast monolithic accounts of platform power and automation. And we wanted to focus more on algorithmic agents, what we call algorithmic agents, we will see what this is, but mostly in what people do with algorithms in everyday life. That's the cultural studies background that pushed us to look at what people do with algorithms in everyday life. And we tried to do that in 3 different domains that were the gig working, platformized cultural production and consumption, and political activism. Why these 3 domains? Because these were the domains in which we were more expert, or we had more interest into. Emiliano is a scholar of social movement studies, and I'm more a scholar of media and cultural industries. And so we just selected these domains because we had an expertise on that. But we were sure that if we expanded the gaze and the investigation to other domains, you will find similar practices. Because our aim was not to research gig working or political activism or culture alone, but we wanted to look at similarities between similar practices between these 3 different domains. And by doing the field work, we realized that there was kind of a mine. These practices were a huge mine that almost never ended. The more we digged, and the more we found new practices. So I will show you some of these practices that we charted, but they are not the focus of the book. So the focus of the book is to reveal how agency and resistance and solidarity are endemic and mundane and ordinary and how platform society is a contested battleground of contrasting forces. So don't focus too much on the practices I will show, because the practices change, they adapt to the platform's evolution, but what is really important is that these practices exist and what they mean for the people, for the users. I will start by tracing agency and defining what we call algorithmic agency. And I will start from describing apparently different practices among themselves, like K-pop, Korean pop fans gaining Spotify charts, gig workers chatting on private online groups, or political activists trying to gain Twitter or X algorithms. What do these Instagram content creators creating what they call engagement groups or bots? What do these practices have in common? If we start, for example, from these practices among the Korean pop fans that gain, what does it mean gaining the algorithm? It is difficult to translate this word in other languages. In Italian too, the other translator was struggling with how do you translate gaining. We call it fregare l'algoritmo, to cheat the algorithm, or to circumvent the algorithm, to go around, to find out, maybe it's from what I understood so far, and maybe I'm not getting it well, but it's also a form of gambiara, of making things to find a way from below to hack. But this is not a form of hacking, because to hack the algorithm, you have to get access to the code. So computer scientists will really criticize me if I use the word hacking, because it's not a proper, maybe it's a metaphorical hacking of the algorithm. How you can hack an algorithm, because actually you cannot really hack an algorithm, because you are continuously trapped in a recursive relationship with the algorithm. As soon as you do something to the algorithm adjusts themselves, because your input becomes an output. It's being processed, and so the output is again an income that you use. So what you do to the algorithm always come back. So you are not really able to just affect the algorithm, because we are always trapped in these symbiotic relationship with algorithms. But what Korean pop fans learned? They learned that they can artificially boost the visibility of their idols by organizing collective action. Collective action aimed at pushing their idols on top of the charts of Spotify by constantly playing in the very first 24 hours from the release of an album, for example. They all together play and stream this album continuously. In this way, they know they are working, they are optimizing the content according to the logic. They understand the logic of the algorithm, and they know that to gain more visibility, the music piece has to be detected, recognized as something that is getting hype and traction in the platform. So they are trying to alter the organic growth of an of music on this platform, trying to shape this. It is nothing new, because this practice of shaping the visibility of a cultural item is as old as technologies are. There's a word in Korean, as I understood, I'm not probably pronouncing it well, sajaeji, that means unethically or illegally boosting a chart ranking. And many Korean bands today receive offers of sajaeji from marketing agencies to boost their audience in exchange for money. Basically, they buy streaming, audience streaming. And these marketing agencies use bot to automate the playing of music. But this was, they were already doing it in the Korean music industry, and also in Italian, and in many places. If you look at that, you will find these practices in the analog times, where marketing agencies were buying huge stocks of CD-ROMs or cassettes or vinyls in order to create an artificial demand for that music. So the libraries or the music shops will order more music than that because apparently there was demand for them. But the same practice is being done not for profit reasons, but just as a labor of love by Korean pop fandoms that call it not sajaeji, but they call it sumseoning. That is the word that K-pop fans use for the practice of collective boosting of their idols' music. Now, sumseoning is fair because they see it as a genuine expression of love for their idols, whereas they consider such wrong because it's outside of our control, it's created by people who have power. So please take a look at this difference because the practice is the same, so artificial boosting, and also Spotify do not like that. No? They try to avoid it, but it's very difficult to detect this artificial behavior on these platforms. They say the practice is the same, but the reasons why they do it are different, and there's already you can detect a moral judgment on this practice. So Korean pop fans believe that sajaeji is illegal, is not fair, while sumseoning is fair. But Spotify believes that both the practices are unfair. Other examples taken from the political activism domain. These are examples usually when you have heard of hashtag activism or the way social movements in the past decade, especially progressive movements like Black Lives Matter or the Indignados in Spain and other movements use Twitter to amplify their voice, their narratives through the optimization of the hashtags. But in this case, users act on Twitter in order to not to amplify their message, but to evade visibility, to escape visibility in order not to be detected and not to be moderated or censored or deplatformed or shadow banned by the platforms. And this practice is being advanced by many different, all the political spectrum, from the far right to the far left. So here you can see how far right activists use symbols in order to not be detected by moderation policies from the platform, or Twitter users to not only leverage former Twitter algorithms spreading hashtags to gain visibility, they also try to avoid too much visibility. In this case, for example, in the center example, these Italian far-right activists used a mix of numbers and letters to insult a left-wing woman politician, so to use hate speech without being moderated. Another example on the left is the way pro-Palestine supporters in the last 2 years, couple of years, avoided moderation and shadow banning through replacing the hashtag pro-Pal or Free Palestine that they experienced to be invisibilized by the platform, using other symbols like the watermelon symbol, or in a research that we are just conducting right now with another postdoc research, we are interviewing Palestinian activists. They say that to avoid shadow banning of our Instagram posts, we have learned to work hard on our captions. We never use words like Free Palestine or Hamas. Instead, we use the watermelon symbol or green man instead of Hamas. But we also constantly change these words because the dictionary of the algorithm is constantly updated, but it's always a step beyond these semantic innovations. And these activists that we interviewed said that we know that the platforms want to make us invisible, but just as they will not kick us from our land, they will not kick us out from our Instagram either. And they are employing practices of algorithmic evasion, what we call algorithmic evasion, other scholars call algo speak. And they also employ tactics like engagement groups on Instagram that we found common among content creators. So we see a lot of similarities and intersections between users being on platforms for different reasons. So wherever you see a platform, wherever you see an algorithm, there are people that are trying to get in around the power that these algorithms are exerting on them. Another example is algorithmic hijacking. We call this practice algorithmic hijacking. For example, police officers in the US have been played copyright music with their phones during attempts to be recorded by activists in order to get those videos banned by platforms like Instagram or YouTube for copyright infringement. So the police is understanding the logics of the platforms, and in order not to be live recorded while arresting someone, they take their phones and play some music, some copyright music, to let this content be platformed. So you know, it's a war that is being weaponized and is being taken forward through algorithms from different sub-political spectrum and perspectives. And then this is a list of all the tactics and the practices that we charted and mapped when doing our field work among the gig workers. We did, for a couple of years, we interviewed 68 gig workers in 5 different countries: Italy, Spain, India, China, and Mexico. We did digital ethnography and traditional ethnography, and what was really rich for us, we get access across time to dozens of WhatsApp private groups created by the workers themselves, and we did discourse analysis on within these conversations. Every day we were revising these conversations going on through the workers, and we mapped a lot of different practices, and we distinguished between individual and collective tactics, even if this distinction is not that fair, or because in order to understand individual tactics, you have to rely on someone else that shares these tactics with you in the groups. So people learn from other people. Workers learn from other workers. So they are never completely individual. And there are a lot of them, but don't focus on these tactics, because as I said before, if we do the ethnography today, we did it between 2020 and 2022, maybe you will find different tactics, or in different cultural contexts, or in different platform environments, maybe you will find other kind of practices. But what is really important is that they exist and that they flourish. One example, I will just take a couple of examples from this list. In China, the riders, the workers give a specific name. They use a jargon to describe this practice that is also common in India. And then the Chinese workers call it shuadan, means deceptively create fake orders. So riders, workers, when they do not receive as much orders as they expect, they create an artificial demand for orders. So they act both as customers and as riders. They have 2 smartphones. In one smartphone, they place the order. Then, as workers, they place themselves in front of the restaurant. So they understood that usually, from experience, they learn that if they place themselves in front of the restaurant, there are very high possibilities that they will receive the order, because the algorithm allocates the order to the closest worker to the restaurant. This is not the only variable, there are others. but this is very important. So they, actually in a way, they artificially create the demand. Then when they receive the order, they accept the order, but before delivering the order, they take back again the other smartphone and cancel the order as a customer. So they get refunded as customers because they do not receive the order and they cancel it. But as workers, they get, according to different policies of the platforms, they can either take the money for the order or either take the pizza. So they realize a free lunch. They create a free lunch, or they create, and working in the loopholes of the platform. And this exists also we witness it also in India. Another example is mutual exchange of working hours. People that the platform do not allow the workers to exchange working hours, but they, through the coordination of WhatsApp, they are able to coordinate this exchange of shifts. Or solidarity logout, against the gamification process going on in these platforms, they still are able to show a little bit of ephemeral and fragile form of solidarity among themselves. For example, in Mexico and in China, when riders get their benefits, instead of keep on working, they log out to let other people receive more orders and keep their benefits too. And I will, in the book, in the third chapter of the book, we describe all of that, all of these practices. That I want to highlight that we do not understand these practices as form of resistance either. Some of them could be, but most of them are forms of agency, first of all. And then, again, Instagram engagement pods. A micro-influencer explain his addition to pods. Well, first I have to explain you what Instagram pods are. Pods are grassroots communities that agree to mutually like, comment on, share, or otherwise engage with each other posts, no matter the content. So users know that pods are heavily discouraged by the platform, because the platform says that this is an unfair way of growing your audience and growing attention, because the Instagram asks you to grow authentically, to grow organically, instead of artificially. But they still frame them, so the users still frame these practices as an acceptable, a morally acceptable strategy, because they consider them a fair and easily affordable defense weapon against the algorithmic government of visibility on Instagram. So joining an engagement group is considered an extremely useful tactic to start building an audience on Instagram. And one of these micro-influencers told us, I don't say that relying on these groups become a drug, but they become the lifebelt in the middle of the sea. A user will always find it hard to abandon the pod unless she reaches very high audience numbers. There are even some users who reached 50,000 followers and are still inside the groups. So he also specified that a willingness to abandon a pod comes from the fear of not being able to provide the service for which a company or brand contracted him. These are examples of rules, alternative moral rules that are established within these groups. So most pod participants share a morally alternative code of conduct to the one enforced by the terms of service of the platform. This code is made explicit by the rules set by each single pod and serves to establish what is deemed as acceptable and what is not. So you as a member of this group could be deplatformed or could be expelled by these groups if you do not contribute to sharing and to like the content of the others. So you have to abide at certain standards of the community. But these standards are alternative standards. So what do all these practices have in common? For us, we took them as manifestations of human agency through algorithms, not against algorithms, in the face of platform power. And this is what we call algorithmic agency. And we try to define algorithmic agency as the reflexive building on both Anthony Giddens' definition of agency, Nick Coldry definition of agency, and Jean and Neve definition of agency. So we put together a reflexive ability of humans to exercise power over the outcome of an algorithm. But this is not enough, because agency in this case is symbiotically embedded in the environment in which it is exercised. So people exercise their agency while acting upon certain algorithmic outputs, and at the same time, as I was telling before, by reacting to them. So algorithmic agency is a reflexive ability that is being exerted in a symbiotic environment. And we go ahead and we distinguish between two different forms of algorithmic agency. We provide in the book our theoretical framework is first to try to sketch 4 different ideal types of algorithmic agency. The first two kinds of these two categories are what we call strategic algorithmic agency and tactical algorithmic agency, building on the famous distinction made by Disertot about strategies and tactics. What does it mean? It means that not all the people have the same possibilities, the same power, and the same availability of agency. So not every user has the same power to exert algorithmic agency. Agency is always entrapped in complex power relations and is being exerted by different positions that are being influenced by the intersection of economic, cultural, racialized capitals. So in this case, you see this graphic. We understand agency as a continuum between people and users that have high availability of time, high availability of money, or high availability of technical expertise, or no or low availability of these features. So this means that there are some, for example, computational propaganda is a strategic algorithmic agency exerted by governments, political parties, social political movements with a lot of money that has the time, the money, and the technical expertise to, for example, organize an army of bots. And then I will delve a little bit more on agency, but first I want to define what we call resistance in this case. First, we distinguish agency from resistance. The manifestations of agency we describe the book move along a continuum that goes from forms of agency openly resisting platform power to other forms of agency that have no intention of questioning or challenging such power. So, this building on, especially on James Scott's idea of everyday or micro-resistance, we define algorithmic resistance as an act performed by someone upholding a subaltern position and responding to power through algorithmic tactics and devices and strategies. But then we have to delve a little bit more on what does it mean, these everyday forms of algorithmic resistance. And this is how our research intersected, and I met with the work of Ricardo Fabiano, because we didn't know, but we were working on similar path and I discovered this article from Ricardo and his colleagues about the infrapolitics of algorithmic resistance. And I think that we were on the same path when trying to put together Disertot and James Scott to understand these everyday practices of algorithmic tactics. Because we argue that resistance is not necessarily spectacular or organized. It often emerges through mundane acts. Following Desserteau, these micro-actions are not about overthrowing the system in a single blow, but about inhabiting and subtly disrupting the spaces configured by algorithms. Importantly, Desserteau's notions of tactics highlights the situated, embodied, and ambiguous nature of resistance. Tactics are relational and opportunistic. They exploit cracks in the system, rather than confronting it head-on. In the algorithmic context, this means understanding resistance not only as explicit political activism, but also as infra-political practices, silent, everyday acts that can potentially undermine the extractive classificatory logic of digital platforms. But there's always tensions between agency and resistance. So algorithmic agency manifests without necessarily constituting a form of resistance to platform power. We stress that agency and resistance are not synonymous. Agency refers to the user's reflexive and often skillful capacity to influence, adapt to, or even optimize algorithmic systems in ways that serve their own goals. However, not all forms of algorithmic agency are necessarily resistant. For instance, users might learn to play recommendation systems to gain visibility, accumulate followers, or boost their own branding. And these practices demonstrate a high level of algorithmic literacy, but they often align with platform logics of visibility, attention, and monetization. So they might even deepen users' integration into extractive ecosystems. And some of these tactics, most of these tactics, in a way, all the critics we receive, but then we usually say that in the book we say that most of these practices finally just work for the process of accumulation of capital of tech platforms. So resistance, on the other hand, entails an oppositional stance toward what we call the moral economy of the platform, the neoliberal logic and values that drive platform design. So in our approach, agency is a precondition for resistance, but not a guarantee of it. Recognizing this tension allows us to avoid both the romanticization of everyday tactics and the deterministic pessimism about algorithmic domination. Instead, we propose to study the situated negotiations where agency can sometimes tip over into resistance, but also where it can be captured, normalized, or commodified. So I introduced the last part of our theoretical framework, that is the concept of moral economy, that we take from Edward Palmer Thompson. What are moral economies? Are a specific set of moral values, habits, and beliefs that shape the individual's view of the economy. Other scholars that built on the work of Edward Palmer Thompson, like Andrew Sayer, said that all economies are suffused with values and beliefs about what constitutes proper activity, regarding rights and responsibilities of individuals and institutions, and qualities of goods, service, and environment. All economies, in their understanding, are moral economies, even neoliberal ones. I will explain this a little bit more. Edward Palmer Thompson argues that human agency can be influenced by different moral economies. So distinguishing these economies is important because it helps us understand the different reasons and values that drive human agency. He takes the examples of the riots, of the British riots of the 17th and 18th century, the bread riots, where apparently the people were behaving irrationally, destroying the floors, and rioting because the price of bread was going too high, was immoral according to them. That the price of bread was too high because according to the traditional moral economy, this is the explanation of Thompson, bread was such a basic good that couldn't be just relying on the law of the market. In a similar way, why we mobilize the concept of moral economy? Because this is an emerging result of our fieldwork. When doing ethnography and reading these WhatsApp groups, these conversations, we realized that most of the time people were debating about moral issues. What is fair and what they were continuously discussing about what is fair and what is not fair. What the platform is doing that is not fair. They changed the algorithm YouTube, now I lost my visibility. This is unfair. This is continuously debating and contrasting, because and gig workers were continuously clashing about some of them that were saying that the algorithm is meritocratic. If you write the most you can, if you do it well, you will gain orders, and if you do not receive orders, it's your fault, it's not the algorithm. So there are many writers and gig workers that were buying the platform logic and ethos, but there were a lot of them that were not buying these logics. There were a lot of clashes around moral issues, what we, to us, seem moral issues. So we thought maybe moral economy could be useful as a framework to understand what is going on here. So through a grounded approach, through a grounded theory approach, this moral discourse was a finding that emerged from the fieldwork. So our proposal is to distinguish the various forms of human agency available in coping with algorithms along a continuum, another continuum, shaped by moral values. And there are two extremes to this continuum, two competing moral economies, the platform and the user moral economies. We use the plural because we discover, well, at least there are more than two moral economies. There is not just the platform moral economy, there is not just the user moral economy, there are neoliberal platform moral economy, but also, for example, platform cooperatives moral economies. As in the field of the user moral economies, there are some kind of what we call pirate or free rider ethics of moral economies, the user moral economies based on pirate or free rider ethics, so hacking the algorithm for individual benefits, or other kind of moral economies centered on entrepreneurial solidarity, mutual support, cooperation between users, but for increasing their entrepreneurial self-identity. And then there are others, more social collectivist moral economies based on mutual support, cooperation, political awareness, struggle organization, strong sense of solidarity. What is really surprising, was surprising for us, that come from media and communication studies. We are not sociologists or sociologists of labor, for example, but we had to face some of these issues. It was discovering that, especially among the workers, but also among content creators, there was many people that were not acting according to the platform logic, because the platform logic is enabling the affordances of the platform, of these platforms, enable, encourage, ask you, prescribe you to compete against each other, to perceive yourself as a self-entrepreneur, to buy the meritocratic ideology, to believe to the authentic competition between users, to accept these ideas of free market and individualism, optimization of performative action. But in the practice, in the everyday life, we find that a lot of people, okay, maybe they accept some of these values, but they are not convinced by other ones, because there's a lot of cooperation. It is incredible to see that in the environment created by food delivery platforms, in the labor environment created by food delivery platforms, that is extremely individualized, top-down algorithmic governance that is really affording, enabling a neoliberal subjectivity, extreme competition and extreme gratification. In this environment in which workers are extremely fragmented over space and time, they still are able to build some kind of networks of fragile forms of solidarity, of cooperation. Cooperation is not coded into the platforms. It is something that comes from the workers. So, if we understand that there are at least two different forms of algorithmic agency, manifestations of agency aligned to the platform model economies or not aligned to the platform model economies. And this drives us, if we put together all these two theoretical proposals, we will have finally our theoretical proposal to have three ideal types of algorithmic agency that can be strategic or tactical, but can also be aligned or not aligned to the platform model economies. Of course, in real life, this is partial and idealistic, because in the real life this is a continuum, and people continuously shift from this swing totally. They can change their mind. They can, even in the same day. Sometimes you say that sometimes they dance with algorithms, sometimes they align with them, and sometimes they clash with them. So we, in this social technical environment, we actively decide to align or to break this alliance with algorithms. And what is the space for resistance in this framework? We can discuss a lot. We can stay. I think it's not interesting to assist to academic debate discussing what is resistance, what is not, to take the boundary between agencies. But we can say that more or less we agree that the area of algorithmic resistance is, of course, on the side of the practices that are not aligned with the modern economy of the platform. And most of the time, they are tactical forms of agency. And this is the conclusion of the book. I'm not concluded here, but I anticipate something on it. This is how we try to put together the theoretical framework with the empirical findings. So we situated all the practices that emerge in the different fieldworks, from politics to culture to gig working, in this framework to see if this framework was explicative, as a explicative power enough. And we positioned these practices in this framework, and we see that some of them can be deemed as forms of resistance or everyday resistance, but most of them are just forms of agency and optimization in the face of platform power. And the third part, and my conclusive part of this lecture, is tracing solidarity. And this was the most, for us, surprising and interesting part, and also maybe productive part of the research, because we entered the fieldwork in search of agency and resistance, and we went out of the fieldwork discovering solidarity. We were not expecting to find such a creative and a vast array of forms of fragile, ephemeral, and stratified, nuanced forms of solidarity. For example, when food delivery riders use private chat groups, we are finally observing how they use what they do with these WhatsApp groups. We understood them as infrastructures of learning, resistance, and solidarity, because in these WhatsApp groups, gig workers learn the tricks of the job. So they are learning environments where people teach each other how to do this job. And of course you could say, well, it's great for the platform, for platform companies to not provide workers with training, because they are out training to the gig workers themselves. They teach each other how to do this job. And the companies save money, because they know that in a maximum way there's a huge army of people that could replace these workers if they leave this job. So they are not focused on offering training for the workers, but they train themselves. And of course, this is another thing that could benefit the companies in the very end. But I see these practices always from another perspective. They do benefit companies in the end, But in the meantime, while people train themselves, they also know each other. They also start building networks of solidarity. They know in the streets and then go in the online groups, or they know each other in the online groups and then meet each other face to face in front of a restaurant in the street. And they start building, and this entanglement between the street and the online environment is the infrastructure that really holds them together. And while they are knowing each other and training each other, they also start organizing and exchanging knowledge that is not in the platform. So there are places for potential there's a lot of potential in these places. And they, in some of these groups, they also organize where collective action and riots and protests are organized. But when you see a collective action, it's just a peak of something that is going on under the sea. So this is a contribution of Emiliano Treve's studies on social movement studies. He said that the WhatsApp groups and these media technologies are used when social movements apparently are silent. They are not silent. They are working under the sea level in these networks, and they are talking to each other, and then there are peaks that are visible of this work. And there are solidarity building places. How private WhatsApp groups of writers foster solidarity. What we found in these groups, they provide news about the introduction or increase of temporary subsidies, provide mutual technical assistance, support new riders, sharing real-time traffic news, providing assistance in emergencies. They talk a lot about algorithms, collective unpacking of platform algorithms. A lot of fault theories and algorithmic imaginaries are shaped by these discussions. Exchange working hours, continuous exchange of GPS location for personal safety. We observed this among female Uber drivers in Mexico, for example. And I think that there are many other. In Naples, for example, one rider get robbed of his motorbike, and after a couple of hours, the WhatsApp group of his peers opened a collection of money online, crowdfunding, and in a couple of hours they buy another motorbike for him, or they go to pick up someone else that had a motorbike broken in the middle of the night in a peripheral and dangerous area. So they need to stop the competition to support other people. So this is not an example of this. This means that the process of this neoliberal subjectification is not really working properly or efficiently or universally. Other forms of fragile solidarity, how people, these are examples of how they exchange working hours. So there's a common characteristic to all the practices we have observed. Algorithmic agency is rarely exercised in complete solitude, carried out by a single individual without the help or partial cooperation of some other patient. So cooperation is the key word. And like, for example, in both Jakarta and Naples, informal associations of riders have sprung up, setting up mutual aid stations to help each other out, cook, rest, repair their bikes. It is an attempt to re-establish from the bottom up the welfare state that the platform economy refuses to grant to the workers. So it's like reinventing the wheel again from scratch in an environment in which traditional trade unions are either absent or are either lost the trust of the workers. And I'm just going to the conclusion. In his famous book on the making of the English working class, historian Edward Palmer Thompson showed how rural peasants and inner city craftsmen were industrialized between the 18th and the 19th century. The peasant gradually left the countryside, whose lands has been enclosed and privatized to be employed in the new cycle of industrial production. Craftsmen who were used to working in small workshops or in their own homes gradually abandoned their workplaces and moved into factories. By the latter part of the 19th century, the process of industrialization of labor in the United Kingdom was matured. In a similar way, we could say that today, the whole range of activities that used to be carried out online on the web, not on the platform, on the web, or offline in the world of atoms, are increasingly platformized. Bloggers, content creators, political activists, musicians, delivery couriers, taxi drivers, as well as consumers of cultural products, consumers of news or food, are undergoing a process of progressive platformization. Work, cultural production and consumption, political activities, and many other activities have been progressively captured and enclosed in the private spaces of commercial platforms. And this is what Shoshana Zuboff showed us. And we want to go beyond this. So not only what platforms are doing to the people, but how people are shaping platforms. Yet platformization is neither uniform nor a frictionless process. Thompson showed that early industrial capitalism took time, around 2 centuries, to turn the masses of English peasants and artisans into disciplined workers, respectful of factory rules and working time. Industrialization has not advanced in a linear fashion, but has been shaped by the emergence of mutual aid associations, benefit societies, clubs, and eventually trade unions, which helped to transform, and I quote Thompson, the 18th century mob in the 19th century working class. If we situate platform capitalism in the longue durée of industrial capitalism, and we look at it as the latest cycle of capitalist accumulation of value, we may be facing a transition similar to the industrial one. Labor, consumption, and political activities are gradually being subsumed and captured within the fences of platforms, but this process of platformization, like the previous one of industrialization, is again neither homogeneous nor linear. On the one hand, the mass adoption of platforms for work, culture, and political activities also entails the adoption by users of the moral economy of platforms, based on individualistic and highly competitive behavior. On the other hand, this moral economy does not impose itself on everyone in the same way. Platform capitalism is taking time to transform its users, whether delivery couriers or Instagram prosumers, into disciplined workers, competing for money and visibility with each other. While this process of platformization is gaining momentum, at the same time, practices emerge that are either holding back or have the potential to shape this process. Just as the English working class emerged between the 18th and the 19th centuries, a new platform working class, with its own specific culture in dynamic contrast to that of the platforms, is slowly emerging. In the case of the Industrial Revolution, Thompson noted that the 19th century factory workers had begun to organize themselves, giving rise to benefit societies governed by extremely strict moral codes and based on mutual aid. In the case of the platform society, our examples show that platform users also started to organize themselves, to come together first in informal solidarity groups, such as private online groups, and then in more formal association. The platform society is thus undergoing two opposing processes. On the one hand, the process of platformization, and more generally of all platformization of all the customers of the platforms, which tend to discipline and socialize them or moralize them to the rules and habitus of this neoliberal ethos. On the other, a process of growing resistance to this moral economy, which is taking on increasingly structured forms of individual and collective action. And these are some examples, especially for us, it was interesting to expand the research to places like Mexico, India, and China, and Naples, for example, because if you look at Milan or Barcelona, there are some tactics, but most of the writers are especially neoliberal subjects. You will say that, okay, it's not much is going on. In India, and even in China, where trade unions are banned, solidarity is huge among gig workers. So which is the conclusion? The goal of our research has been primarily to show what these categories of users and digital laborers have in common. The ability to painstakingly improve their working conditions, organize forms of collective action, and build solidarity bonds in the face of the disproportionate computational power wielded by tech companies and regardless of their situated class or race or gender status. That are really important, and I recognize that this is a weakness of our analysis, that we didn't focus on the contribution, on the relevance of class, race, and gender status of these workers. But we wanted to see, wanted to look at what all these different class and gender and racial and economical status have in common. People from different cultural contexts, what do they have in common? Because if they do have in common practices of agency and solidarity, then solidarity, we can say that agency is banal, ordinary, mundane, everywhere. So thousands of food delivery couriers, after meeting in private chats, started to organize unauthorized strikes, found new unions, or decided to definitely log out to fund cooperative platforms like this guy in the photo. I take in Florence. This guy was a former Deliveroo rider in Florence, and then he created a cooperative platform in Florence called Robin Hood. And that belongs to this network of food delivery cooperative platforms named Coop Cycle, that in 2023 had 70 different cooperatives around Europe. So people have begun to realize that computational power in the hands of platforms can be countered only by joining forces and pooling our knowledge, time, and economic resources. Computational power can be confronted only through cooperation, mutual aid, and collective power. Platforms are a battleground where people sometimes dance with algorithms and others clash with them. And to think about algorithmic resistance is to refuse the naturalization of algorithmic systems as neutral, inevitable, or unchallengeable. For this reason, I am quite critical with Mark Fisher's idea of capitalist realism. Because there's a lot of nihilist vision that do not account for the spaces, the loopholes and the spaces for agency. Resistance can be small-scale, tactical, even ambiguous, and yet deeply significant. We cannot dismiss it. We cannot overemphasize it, but we shouldn't not even dismiss it. So it's not about hacking the system in an heroic or individualistic sense. It is about inhabiting the cracks of algorithmic infrastructures. It is about reasserting agency where systems seek to automate behavior. And finally, thinking about algorithmic resistance is an invitation to imagine, for everyone to imagine, maybe it's not really efficient in subverting the power relationship, but it's an invitation to imagine and enact alternative engagement with technology, grounded not in domination and extraction, but in cooperation, solidarity, contestation, and care. Thanks.